so I'm going to talk about technical creativity today. So when I say, I'm saying technical creativity because most of the applications I deal with are in that domain, but I think a lot of what I talk about crosses multiple domains, and but I won't profess to be artistic, although I think certainly some of these things also apply there. What I'm also basing this on is work that's gone on for many years. I've been doing various sorts of teaching on this, but in particular, I've got a course that's just come out on Interaction Design Foundation. And if you've not, any of, I mean, this is probably particularly for those who are more design oriented, but if you've not come across this is wonderful resources, lots and lots of courses and stuff. So anyway, I've got that course has just come out recently. So first of all, I was going to talk about what is creativity, and there are books written about this, so I won't give you the whole book version, but I'm just going to give you a simple definition, which is pretty much what you'd find in most of the people who study creativity academically and also practically. So I'm going to say creativity is where novelty and utility meet. So I think we sort of say something creative has to be novel, at least novel for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be new for the world, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And I've said utility. It has to do a purpose. It has to do something that's reasonably sensible. Now, in a more, vocational domain, like user interface design or management or tourism or science, that utility is sort of fairly obviously about utility. But I think even in artistic domain, you can't just say, I've got a painting and it's new, or I've got a sculpture and it's new. You want to say, I've got a sculpture, it's new and it's artistic. It's got some aesthetic qualities or something like that. So there's always some idea of it doing the right thing as well as it doing a new thing. But there are these different levels. So I said it's not necessarily about world-changing creativity. Now, sometimes that happens. Now, the guy on the left is Arthur Fry. That's right. I always have to remember his name. He's the guy who invented Post-it notes. I should have had a Post-it note with me, shouldn't I? That's pretty much, it's not world-changing in the sense of moon rockets, but actually it probably affects more people than moon rockets. Or it could be, there's also world-changing stuff in terms of iconic things. Again, those of you who've got perhaps a bit of a design background might recognise the Stark lemon squeezer on the right-hand side, that is really used in design exhibitions, and you'll find lots of books with that in because it was such a novel and new design. But there's a lot more day-to-day ingenuity as well. So this picture here is I just actually found this somewhere fairly randomly on the net, and it's somebody in a garage and they've taken an old tyre, they've flattened it on the wall, glued it onto the wall, and they're using it as a pinboard for messages. So you can have ingenuity at that sort of level as well as this sort of groundbreaking new things. And I guess probably in terms of academic research, you sit somewhere between the two. Applying this into the sort of design domain, which is sort of where I'm sort of closest to, but I sort of hope this will generalise to different ones. You can think of sort of very bespoke original problems. So like a few weeks ago, I was talking to somebody in engineering and about the need to put machine learning, but together with human understanding in order to do engineering design. And obviously, classically, people just did engineering design. Now there's machine learning techniques which can generate designs, but how do you do that synergistically? How do you bring them together? How do you design the ways that allow people to do those design exercises? That's a big, bespoke new problem. There can be some big general problems, like you've all had like the word font menu, which just scrolls forever. So how do you design very, very long menus? Or there's little decisions like, again, if you imagine doing Word, how do you decide what word to use? Do you say bold or embolden? What makes you make those sort of decisions? So, creativity, where does it come from? There is a sort of model. I mean, particularly you see this in sort of Western artistic traditions, fine art traditions, but we also get this in, certainly I get this in computing, is this idea that the muse from on high drops creativity on you, that you either have it or you don't. And sometimes these works of genius give you that sort of feeling. So again, there's Arthur Fry there with the post-it notes, or Felix Stark's lemon squeezer. You know, these things came from an house. This wonderful, brilliant idea that changed every office in the kingdom, or changed the nature of design work. So that's sort of the idea of the muse. And I certainly get this in computing as well. People think about things like debugging. You know, you either can do it or you can't. And I said, certainly that's one of the ideas people often think about with artistic creativity. But you might think the same about research. You might think, I'm just not very creative in my research, you know, because the muse has not dropped on you from on high. However, if you dig a little bit more deeply, even into those stories of absolute genius, you find there are deeper stories there. So here's Arthur Fry again, and the post-it note. And the story of Arthur Fry and post-it note is Arthur Fry is designing a new glue, and he's trying to make a glue that is a sticky glue, one that works. And he designs a new glue, and what happens? You pull it and it just comes off. Right? So that's it. He then spent 2 years going around the company, talking to different people, saying, I had this glue that came off and I vaguely feel it might be useful for something. And after 2 years, somebody said, aha, I've got an idea for what it might be useful for. And that's how the post-it happened. It didn't happen in a moment of genius as he first noticed it didn't work. It happened through a period of 2 years and through teamwork, working together. The Stark, you know, in fact, the Stark lemon squeezer was designed in an evening in a restaurant, I think in Italy, I think that's right. And again, one of the stories of it, the way he describes it, is this sort of, you know, just had this idea for a lemon squeezer. However, preserved in one of the design museums is the napkin, and he really was a napkin, that he had in the restaurant that he wrote on. And it's covered in these tiny scribbles. And they start off with fairly classic lemon squeezers. And then I think the shape suggests a squid. And you have these pictures of squid. And then the two, and maybe you've been eating squid for all I know in the meal. And then gradually the two coalesce and become the lemon squeezer design. It did happen quickly. He was a clever guy and he was a good designer and everything. But it didn't happen instantly. It wasn't this magic flash. There was this evolution that happened rapidly, but you can see the stages of it on that napkin. And these sort of should, I think, give sort of sparks to you all. It says, actually, this is not so different. You know, it's not that we're all going to become the geniuses that are changing the world, but actually the processes of creativity are ones that can apply to us all. So what I tried to do, and I've been trying to do this over a number of years, is create patterns and tools that help people to be more creative, help myself and help other people to be more creativity. I'm not going to try and generate a creativity machine. It's not something you can turn the handle and creative ideas pop out the end. What I do try to do is put people into a mental space for creativity. So a place where you can, you know, if you're there, you're likely to have creative thoughts. You know, and that can be a physical space, but it's often a mental space. So how do we make these spaces for creativity? For me, actually, cups of tea are very important. So let's make a space for creativity. Now, sometimes that is about physical space. So this is not me in my current, where I'm working at currently, but a previous house. I used to have a desk, which was actually just a table in the living room, and in the same room, a comfy chair. If I was sitting at the desk, I was working, I was being productive. Whereas if I wanted to just think a little bit more, perhaps read a bit, I would sit on the comfy chair. And that change, you know, sometimes it might be going to a different place. For some of you, it's going into the office, or perhaps not going into the office, going home, that changes the habits of mind you've got. This will vary for you. So I think one thing you can do is watch out for the places where different kinds of thinking happen to you. And then you can deliberately use those. Or deliberately establish it. Think to yourself, I'm only ever going to do this kind of thing in this area. And you generate a habit in your body that becomes a habit of mind. You know, so eventually it's like, when I want to think like this is where I go. And when you go there, you think like that. What you can wear can do as well. So today I've worn my well, you can just see it, my interaction design org t-shirt, because obviously I was mentioned the interactive design creativity course earlier. But during that course, when I was videoing it, I always wore the same t-shirt. It was one with this sort of funky pattern on. And but when I was been recording videos about statistics, I've worn one that sort of it's actually RDF semantic web, but things that look a little bit more techy on them. So it might be, there's a particular, you might have a particular hat you wear or whatever it is, but sometimes those clothing can change the way you think and feel about yourself. I mean, you can certainly do that for other people, but it's amazing these effects these things can have on yourself. And again, it might not work for you, but have that sense about what are the things that turn you into a particular mode. But crucially, whether it's physical spaces, whether it's clothing you wear, what you're trying to do is create a mind space, a place where you're ready to be creative. Now, again, sometimes that's driven by the activities you're doing. So for a lot of people, certainly for me, doing things like taking a shower, going for a walk, even washing the dishes are places where my mind is more open and more able to think about things in ways that don't tie me down to something very specific. If you're like me, I spend a lot of time trying to be productive, whether it's answering emails or writing reports or whatever it is. Creating that space to think, now I'm not doing something, I am thinking. The task, there's a range of tasks which I find are helpful for that. And they're usually ones which keep you busy, so you can't be doing something else, but are not too thinking heavy. So something like while you're in a shower, you're not having to think about having a shower, or similarly with washing the dishes. You're making decisions that are enough to keep you from thinking I should be doing something very specific. So those are quite good. So if they're too thinking heavy, you can't let your mind wander. You want things that those times that when you're doing something and your mind can wander a bit. Although you've got to be a little bit careful. So, if you think, I'm going to take a walk in order to think about something, probably doesn't work. I mean, again, it might do for you. And one of the things to be aware of in all of these kinds of is to note yourself, try and understand the places of both the mental places, the physical spaces that help you think better. One of my biggest challenges when I was doing this creativity course was I realised I needed to talk about how you time manage creativity. And boy, did I have to be creative for that bit. It was like, oh my goodness, how the heck do I do that? So I had to practice a lot of the techniques I was teaching in order to be able to think about time managing creativity. There are things you can do. So we talked about this mental space. Can we plan for these mental spaces? Now, again, everybody differs a bit, but for me, there are things that there's tasks I have to do that just sit there at the back of my mind, and they're constantly getting in the way, making it very, very hard to progress. They're typically the kinds of stuff, it's things like the email to somebody that you need to get, or the thing you should be doing, but you end up not doing things because of the thing you should be doing, but you're not quite sure how to start. So there's two things I do to those. And I said I don't always succeed, but if I can and it works well, this can help. So first of all is the clear the decks thing. So can you actually do it? Can you get things done that are getting in the way of your mind, if you're thinking? Finish the tasks that just been bothering you. So that's I think of that as sort of backward clearing the decks. They're gone. If you can't do that, can you put something off to later? So you've got that difficult email, you should be writing it. Say to yourself, well, I know I'm going to have 20 minutes before I start work tomorrow morning. I'll do that email then. You've put it off to the future. It's scheduled into the future. So that means you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to feel guilty about it. And leaving yourself space when your mind doesn't have things in. Sometimes I call this macabre management. So those who know your Dickens, Miss Micawber was the procrastinator. And usually procrastination seems a bad thing, but occasionally it can actually be quite a useful and positive thing. So you can think of positive procrastination, putting things off in order to create productive time now. Now, one of the ways you might, you probably have yourself is this is my book of to-do lists. It's a bit sad, isn't it? Lots of things. So two things about this. One is that can be useful, actually, the writing things down. You might find this. By writing it down, you can then, it's not using up your mental space. However, at their worst, a to-do list like that can be a not done list. It's the guilt trip, the thing that says, I have failed, right? The list of things you failed to do. Try to use this and other things in your life as emotion management. And I'm going to say emotion management is more important, especially for creativity, but for most of your life, than time management. So think about this to-do list or anything like that in terms of what it does to your emotional state. Normally, to-do lists make the things you haven't done most significant. Try to do things that make the things you have done significant. Again, you might do this already, but if I do something that should have been on the to-do list, but it never got that far, I will sometimes write it on and cross it off because it makes me feel good. And if it makes you feel good, one is that's good for your mental health anyway, but also one of the few reliable scientific results in creativity is that on the whole, again, there's exceptions to this, as with everything, positive feelings make you more creative. Sometimes you can also try to plan away creativity. Now, planning away creativity, that sounds like you want to be creative. We want to be creative people, but you know what it's like? You need the one big idea. You need to solve that big problem for your PhD thesis, or you need to design the new super widget that's going to change the world, have the new insight, create the new sculpture or picture, or whatever it is. You know that thing with the empty sheet of paper, the blank sheet of paper? How do you fill it? How do you fill that void? It's hard. One thing you can sometimes do, though, is just like planning for, doing it type tasks. Sometimes we can break up that need for the big idea into lots of small things. So for instance, if you're writing and you're stuck with the blank sheet of paper problem, write whatever comes into your mind. Again, different people vary on this and how they achieve this. So you have to get used to listening to yourself. But it might be, rather than trying to write the thesis, you think, let's just write a paragraph. And sometimes you can break things up. You might be a top-down thing, because that might be about breaking it up into lots of bits and say, actually, I want a paragraph on X. One of the things I find useful, actually, it's a technique I've been finding really useful, in fact, is even when I'm not giving a talk, I often write slides for the talk and then cut them up. So if I want to write something, I write it as if I was giving a talk. And somehow it's easier, I find, to give a talk than to write. And then I cut those out and then I stick them. And if I've given a talk, I often do this, I play with them on paper, on the table as cut out ones. But sometimes also when I'm finished, I will take the talk, I will extract the slides, put them into a big document with just the gaps between them. And I find it's so much easier to write a couple of paragraphs for a slide that I've got written than I can to just look at the big blankish paper. So it's ways of breaking up that big creativity. I need to write the whole paper to, or the whole chapter to, I need to write a paragraph about this slide. We can think about, things, classic two-dimensional space here. Oh dear, you can see I'm a sort of computing person because we always do these kind of things. Perhaps it's the maths as well, see the world in terms of two-dimensional spaces. So you can think about the complexity of the task, which is sort of how long or how much effort, but also the amount of creative or emotional energy you need. They're probably slightly different things, but I've clumped them together a bit here. So on the bottom left, there's the things that are pretty simple and don't really require a lot of creativity. So for those, if they're so simple, you don't need creativity, well, just do them, get them out of the way, cross them off your to-do list. Yay, it makes yourself feel good and you can justify taking a bit of time. Then there's the things that are a bit more complicated, but still don't require emotional energy. This isn't quite the same category, but I sometimes talk about busy work, things that if you spend half an hour doing, you've done half an hour's work. Right? Now, they might be unpleasant things, there might be pleasant things, but you know that if you allocate half an hour gets done. The difficult bits, the ones at the top of this picture, are the things where if you spend a half an hour, there might be nothing at the end, or there might be absolutely wonderful things at the end. So those are things we want to have creative stuff, but the bits at the bottom are almost like the easy things. They're the things that traditional time management deals with. Because it's the things above the line which are the more creative things. Now, some of those are small creative things. You know, it's that little nitty thing. You know, if you're in computing domain, if it's coding, it might be, you know, fiddling that little fiddly algorithm to get something to work. If you're, I'm trying to think of examples. The other domains, you know, it might be just, you know, perhaps you're a chemist and you've been itching to just try doing a little bit of practical work in the lab, and you know what you want to do pretty much, but you need to do a little effort. And, you know, some things are fun. Some things aren't, like I talked about the emails that you keep putting off and off and off because they're difficult. But the things that take up that energy, they're harder to know what to deal with. So if they're fun things, you can get on with them. If not, then they're these problem ones that you probably want to push into the put off category. But the real nirvana, the things that you're really after, of course, those big ideas, those big creative tasks. And your challenge is to try and plan those away into either clearing the decks things that are trivial to do, just get on with, or at least those small creative things. So when I talked about writing and the way I write the talk as if I was going to give a talk for, say, your PhD chapter, and then I cut the slides up and I stick them in. What I've done is I've turned the big thing, writing the whole paper or the whole chapter, into a lot of small creative tasks, one for each slide. So I've moved it from being in that nirvana territory to being the sort of funnish, you know, creative but relatively small one. Or I might do something like, you know, while I'm being creative, I try to watch out for myself slipping into doing those tasks. So at the point, I try to make myself not write the whole paragraph while I'm in motion. So I try to do the planning bit, because the plans I've got there in the nirvana square. And often the really good thing to do when you've got really creative space is to work out ways of turning the big problem into smaller problems. It's often one of the biggest creative steps you can do. And again, I'll emphasise this is all about emotion work. And this is true of life in general, but particularly for creativity, managing your emotions, absolutely central. So you can do that for yourself, but you know, again, I'll let you decide whether you think what you think about your own university for this. But you know, organisations, and certainly though, if you're in positions where you can make differences in terms of structures, really can make a difference. So back to Arthur Fry and post-it notes. 3M was clearly the kind of organisation that allowed him to make a mistake, not feel, oh dear, I've done terrible, I'm going to be kicked out at my next review meeting, and go around the organisation telling people about his rubbish glue. A forgiving organisation often is a more creative organisation. But often we are our worst critics. So we can try and make the context around us more or less forgiving, and you may or may not have control over that. But often, you know, we beat ourselves up about it, you know, whether it's my to-do list with all the undone stuff. But at the risk of sounding trite, failure sows the seeds of your next success, you know. So with Arthur Fry, he failed to make a glue, and that became the post-it note. And I said it does sound trite, but do remember, so sometimes you've done something, you've had that, and you thought, oh, that's rubbish, that's all that, and you start to, but as you're about to throw away that bad idea, that silly thing, that failure, unwrap it, and who knows, you might have a stroke of genius. Sometimes you do just throw it away after looking again, but just look one more time, one more time. So just a word about the creativity plan, right? So we talked a bit about planning creativity. I'm going to say it is quite useful sometimes to create those plans, to think, oh yes, I've broken this, I want to do this, and I've thought of ways of doing this. But I'm going to say a creativity plan is something to do when you can't think of anything better to do. And as researchers, a research plan is something to do when you can't think of anything better to do. Now, I don't mean, you think you'll go out, well, sometimes it's worth going out into the sunshine, especially for creativity. But what I mean is, if you have a better creative thing to do that usually. Replan maybe, reschedule, think about things, but don't see it as something that is tying you down. Think of something that releases you. That means when you've got that odd hour, you can think, what's the top of my list of things to do? However, that's not the first thing to do. So it took me many years to learn this very simple formula. I'll let you put in the F and W, and I'll tell you what the DWYFL stands for. Do what you feel like. If you manage to create some space, some time in your diary, you're in the place where you have an hour a day, 10 minutes even, when you can do something that is more creative, more thoughtful. If there's something on your mind, if there's something running through, do that. Don't necessarily do the thing that's at the top of your list. So, effectively have a number of things that are on that sort of, they're important, they're things that need to be done, but don't necessarily say, I have to do the very top one. If something is buzzing around your head, you're almost certainly going to be most productive doing that at that time. So of those tasks, if there's one that's buzzing around, do it, because you'll almost certainly be more productive. And in particular for creative tasks, it's true. But you've got to that time, you've opened up your time, you've opened up your diary, you've made your space, you're sitting in the right place, and still nothing happens. You've probably been there. The blank sheet stares at you no matter what things you do. So how can we fill it? So I'm going to talk about two things. It's convergent and divergent thinking here. And these are classic things, again, in the creative literature, which together work towards creativity. So you can think of two kinds of creativity. There's ant-like creativity, which some people might think is not being creativity. The small, incremental, evolutionary step, slow and safe, the little tweak to an old idea. Maybe I'll take my phone design and just make the corners a little less curvy or a little more curvy. Make it make it grey rather than black or something like that. These are the ant type steps. They're convergent. They're often about getting closer into the best solution for something. And then there's the bold leaps in the dark, flea-like creativity, revolutionary change. Divergent thinking that's generating new ideas. Very fast, very powerful, but often wrong. When I was a child in Cardiff, I used to have a metal mug, quite a big mug, and I'd put hot tea in it. And we had a cat, and the cat sometimes had fleas. And I used to sit on the floor a lot and do a lot of my sitting. I'd sit on the floor, and the mug would go on the carpet. And every so often I'd pick up the mug and I'd think, oh no, because 2 or 3 fleas in it. If you're a bit squeamish, you'll get upset at this point. And what happened, of course, you have hot mug on carpet. What fleas do is when they sit in the carpet and they got to the right stage, if they feel warmth, they jump. Right? And if they're lucky, they land on a cat, and then they eat a bit of cat blood, and then they breed the next generation. But the vast majority aren't. Some of them end up in my cup of tea, and they can end up anywhere. Big steps, but often wrong. Creativity often is putting those two together, making those big steps, but then finding ways to pull them into something that does its job. You can think of divergence about being, novelty and utility. Divergence is about seeking that novelty, and convergence is about seeking utility. However, that's probably oversimplifying things, because often I find that the two feed off each other. So as I'm being convergent, as I'm diving in, being a bit more analytic, that opens up. If you keep your eyes open, thoughts, especially about where it's failing, often gives you the ideas to try something else that's new. So these two sort of feed off each other in really productive ways. The thing a lot of people find hardest, though, is perhaps the divergent stage. Again, it varies on who you are. So you might be really good at generating lots of ideas and bad at doing the analytic and vice versa. So I'm going to focus first on the divergent side and one technique amongst many to help you with this. So I'm going to talk about bad ideas. So maybe you're good at thinking of loads of good ideas, but you've probably been in one of those brainstorming sessions, and people say, "Oh yeah, we're being non-judgmental here. Just think of any idea," and then, of course you go, they're not. Everybody's thinking, "Oh, that's just a dumb one." Right? Don't think of good idea. Try to think of an idea, but make it a bad idea or a silly idea. And boy, will you be a lot more creative if you try and think of really, really bad ideas. They can be Heath Robinson bad ideas, like complex all over the place, or something as an oxymoron, like a chocolate teapot. Think of that bad idea. And actually, the interesting thing is, it's amazingly easy to find chocolate teapots on the web. And then have a series of prompts. And these are very basic, simple things. I'm not going to talk about them through in great detail yet, actually, because I'll go through quickly. But crucially, I'm going to focus on, which should I focus on? Well, first on the bad. When you've got something that's bad, really try and dig and say, why is this bad? Why is a chocolate teapot a bad idea? I mean, the chocolate's clearly not bad, It's presumably because it will melt when you put hot water, but I mean, maybe other things you think of as well. Think about them, really dig in. But is melting bad? So sometimes what I ask people to do is to sort of two things. One is sometimes I say, imagine you're a car salesman selling this thing. How are you going to justify it? But also, are there things that melt that are not bad ideas? My favourite for this was once had the idea that somebody came up with was an inflatable dartboard. And we spent quite a long time sort of saying, well, somebody said, well, it's full of air. Well, can we think of other things that are full of air that are not bad? And things like car tubes. If something is inflatable, you can deflate it and pack it up. So what's good about it? So obviously, if you can deflate something, that's useful because you can pack it. And then you can start to take those two together. Oh, sorry, again, interestingly enough, the inflatable dartboard was from many years ago, and they are now for sale. So you can then ask yourself, can you make it a good idea? So, if there are good things about it, like the ability to pack up your inflatable dartboard, keep them. If it's a bad idea, can you change it? So what's bad about inflatable dartboard? Well, it's not actually the air's in it, and it's actually that it bursts because there's air in it. Those darts break it. Can you perhaps change the context in some way that makes the bad thing not so bad? So perhaps those darts get separated with ones with fuzzy felt at the end or sort of stickers on or something. And suddenly you've got this inflatable dartboard that you can pack into your suitcase and take off to Ibiza or wherever you go holidaying in the summer. And at 3 in the afternoon, after you've woken up after drinking all night, it goes on the pool and you play darts while you drink your pina coladas and then get ready for the next night. Or you might just learn from some of the aspects of it. You learn something new from one of the aspects. I remember once talking about a glass hammer, and we ended up thinking very much about the materials and about glass fibre, and when being a hard material like glass was better as to being better, even though it shatters. So you can sort of learn about aspects, even if the overall idea you might discard. So what I'm going to do is, I think this is my last thing, is I'm going to give you it's a user experience design example, just to give a sort of sense of what a concrete, doing this in practice. And this was one where I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, or perhaps a couple of months ago, actually, about 2 months ago. And I literally said, I'm going to just grab something that's a problem and try and solve it, use some of the techniques. So this, I'm not doing it live for you now, but it was done very rapidly as an exercise. So some really bad ideas. I mentioned those long menus that you have in Word, like for the font menus. So bad idea, I thought, should I just randomise the order of those things in a big menu? So it might be the font menu, it might be perhaps all the things you can do to a picture in Photoshop. So what just randomise the order? Why not randomise it? So every time you see it, it's in a different order and it's a random order. So that's a bad idea. So what's bad about it? Well, clearly you're not going to be able to find the thing you want very easily. You're going to have to search all the way through. There's lots of, it doesn't take a lot of research to tell you that's going to take you for ages. And sure enough, it does. What's good about it? Well, I thought, well, actually, serendipity, if I randomise the order, the thing at the top might be some useful thing in this application that I've never thought of using before and might be useful. Now, I might not need it that moment. I'm looking for something else. But, maybe I think, oh, and then next time I'm doing something, I think, I remember seeing that. So I've got a good thing about it, which is serendipity, and then a bad thing. So can I preserve the good? So serendipity, that was good. I want some serendipity. Not necessarily in the middle or when I'm trying to do something else, but it's still a good thing to do. So I started to think then about, can I create serendipity for menu items without interrupting what somebody's doing? So first of all, I thought I'll put the menu back where it started. I've unrandomised it. That's cheating a bit. But what happens if I just track the items that people use in the menu and deliberately look for the least used items or the little used options? And then maybe sometimes when you open an application, it gives you that little tip. Did you think of, if it's been tracking what items I use on menus, it can then know which tips to give me, rather than just give me a random tip that I might already know about. So I said, when I was fixing the bad, I said one way is just to not randomise it. But could I make it easy to locate the appropriate menu items? So again, we can look at tracked behaviour. There's a common thing to do, and you see this in font menus, where you copy items. You don't get rid of them where they belong, to the top of the list to make them accessible. So you have this sort of short menu of common items and a long one. And that's quite a common thing to do. I think if you hadn't thought about this, you might think about this. But then I thought, why not just highlight common items on that list? So this would be true if it was a random list. It would make it easier to find in a random list, rather than bringing them to the top. If it's a random list, you'd highlight them. But you could apply this when it's not a random list. In fact, there was a thing called training wheels many years ago, which was exactly about doing this for training people how to use a new system. You basically disable not just all the other items, but leave them in place. So imagine something like that, but instead of disabling things, everything's enabled, but I just highlight the things that you commonly use. And maybe, every so often, highlight a few serendipitous ones as well, just to give me a sort of edging of something that I might have missed. So we'll come back to the glass hammer. One of the things I've found fascinating over the years doing these kind of talks is that when we do an exercise, and maybe I'll come to Cardiff sometime and do a person-to-person exercise, and we'll do it as an exercise. You get one of these bad ideas, you work through it, you get some ideas out, and literally the next thing you do is you notice one in reality. That inflatable dartboard, I don't think it existed at the time we had those discussions, but you can buy them now. This is obviously an artistic glass hammer, but I remember the glass hammer as an example, and in talking through it, realised that glass was always going to be a bad choice for the top of the hammer, although it made us think about a lot of other things. But for the handle, you could actually have a glass fibre hammer. Literally 1 week after that session, I happened to be walking around a DIY store. I was not looking for it. And there, on the shelves, a hammer, and I pick it up, and the handle is glass fibre. So, you can be creative, and it is quite amazing the things that come out of that.